The evening sky was painted with soft shades of orange and pink as Armin's car moved slowly along the quiet road that led to his mansion. Tall trees stood on both sides of the lane, their leaves whispering in the wind as if they were telling forgotten stories. For most people this was a beautiful sight, but for Armin it was just another evening in his life that was filled with meetings, deals, and endless plans. He had built his empire with determination and sleepless nights, and now he lived in one of the grandest houses in the city. Yet even with all his wealth, there was always a strange silence in his heart that nothing seemed to fill inside the mansion. His little daughter Mira was waiting, as she always did whenever he came. Mira was the light of his world, the one reason he still believed life had more to offer than numbers and contracts. She had a habit of running toward the door whenever she heard his car enter the driveway, her tiny feet tapping against the marble floor, her laughter filling the hall. But today something felt different. The house was quiet, too quiet, and for the first time, Armin felt a strange uneasiness rising within him. He stepped out of his car, holding his briefcase, and walked to the large wooden door. Before he could ring the bell, he heard a soft giggle, not from inside the house but from the garden, the sound of Mira's laughter. Armin's heart skipped a beat. Why was she outside alone at this hour? The caretaker was always careful, the gates were always locked. Nothing like this had ever happened before. He hurried to the garden, following the laughter that was mixed with another voice. When he turned the corner, his eyes froze on a scene that made his breath stop. There, in the garden under the tall oak tree, stood a woman, her clothes worn, her hair uncombed, her face tired yet gentle, and in her arms was Mira resting happily, as if she knew the woman all her life. The sight struck Armin like lightning. For a moment, he could not move. The briefcase slipped from his hand and landed softly on the grass, but he did not even notice. The woman looked up at him, her eyes calm, though her appearance spoke of hardship. She did not run, she did not panic. She only held Mira, more carefully, as if protecting her from the sudden shock of the moment. Armin's heart raced in confusion. His mind screamed at him to shout, to call the guards to pull Mira away. But his eyes saw something his mind could not explain. His daughter was smiling, her little hands playing with the woman's hair, her laughter free of any fear. If this woman was a danger, why would Mira be so peaceful in her arms? Armin finally found his voice, though it came out rough and broken. "Who are you? Why are you holding my daughter?" The woman lowered her gaze for a moment, then looked back at him, her voice soft but steady. "My name is Ronnie. I found her near the gate, wandering outside alone. I did not want her to get hurt, so I stayed with her until someone came." The words sank into Armin's ears slowly. His first feeling was guilt, not anger. Mira had slipped outside the gate while the caretaker must have been busy, and he himself had been too caught up in meetings to return earlier. If not for this stranger, anything could have happened. A car on the road, a wrong step, a fall. The thought sent a chill down his spine. Mira stretched her arms toward Armin, smiling, but then quickly turned back to Ronnie as if refusing to leave her. That small act broke something inside him. It was not only about fear anymore, it was about the bond he saw forming in front of him between his child and a stranger dressed in rags, yet holding more warmth in her arms than all the walls of his mansion. Armin stepped closer and gently took Mira into his arms. The little girl laughed again and pressed her cheek against his shoulder, but her eyes kept drifting back to Ronnie. Armin looked at the woman more carefully now. Her face carried marks of struggle, yet her eyes shone with a kind of strength that wealth could never buy. There was no greed in her look, no fear, only a quiet dignity. "Why did you not leave after finding her?" he asked slowly. "You could have placed her near the gate and gone your way." Ronnie lowered her head. "A child is not something to leave alone," she whispered. "I stayed because I knew her family would come and she would be safe. That was enough for me." The honesty in her words struck Armin deeply. He had met countless people in his business life, each one hiding motives behind polished smiles. Yet here was a woman with nothing who expected nothing. Still, she stayed to protect what was precious to him. The caretaker finally came running, his face pale with shock. He apologized again and again, bowing. His head Armin raised his hand and stopped him. There was no need to scold anyone now. What mattered was Mira was safe. But as his eyes returned to Ronnie, standing silently near the tree, he felt a question forming in his heart. Why was a woman like her here alone? What story did she carry in her tired eyes? Mira stretched her small hands again, calling out to Ronnie. The innocent trust of a child made Armin pause once more. He could have sent the woman away at once. He could have closed the gate and forgotten her face forever. But something inside told him this meeting was not ordinary. It was as if fate itself had placed her there at that very moment. Armin took a deep breath and spoke in a gentler tone. You must be hungry. Will you come? Inside for some food, Ronnie shook her head quickly, almost in fear of burdening someone like him. I am fine, she said softly, but Mira cried out and clapped her hands as if she wanted her new friend to come with them. The sound of his daughter's plea was stronger than any doubt in his mind. For the first time in many years, Armin chose to listen not to logic, not to pride, but to the simple voice of his child's heart. He looked again at Ronnie and said, Please come inside. At least for her. The woman hesitated, her fingers tightening on the scarf around her shoulders. But then she nodded slowly. And so they walked back toward the mansion, the little girl in her father's arms still reaching toward the woman who had just stepped into their lives. Armin felt an unusual stillness inside him. He did not know yet that this night was the beginning of a story that would change not only his daughter's world, but his own heart forever. The golden lights of the mansion glowed softly as Armin walked inside carrying Mira, while Ronnie followed quietly a few steps behind. Her eyes wandered around the wide hall, the polished floor, the shining chandelier, the tall paintings that looked down on her like silent witnesses. For someone who had no roof to call her own, the sight was overwhelming, yet she kept her gaze lowered, as if afraid of stepping on ground that did not belong to her. Armin noticed her unease, but said nothing. His own thoughts were tangled like threads of silk. He had invited strangers before, but they were business partners dressed in perfect suits. Never someone like this woman whose clothes carried dust and whose hands bore the marks of hardship. Why then did he feel it was right to let her in? Perhaps it was Mira's trust, or perhaps it was the way Ronnie had spoken with no greed, only care. They reached the dining hall, a long table shining under crystal lights. Armin placed Mira on a chair and asked the staff to bring food. But Ronnie shook her head again. Please do not bring anything for me, she said quietly. I only came because she wanted me to. I will leave after a while. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes carried a wall that told stories of pride mixed with pain. She did not want to be seen as someone begging. Armin looked at her for a moment and then gave a small smile. Food is never charity, he said. It is something one shares with another. And if my daughter's smile is the reason you are here, then you should eat with us. Ronnie hesitated, but when Mira clapped her hands in excitement and called her name in her tiny voice, she finally nodded. Soon warm dishes were placed on the table, rice, vegetables, bread, soup, everything steaming with rich aroma. Ronnie sat carefully at the far edge of the table, her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted a spoon. It had been days since she had tasted food like this, and yet she ate slowly with quiet dignity, not rushing, not showing hunger though. Her tired body longed for every bite. Armin watched her silently. He had seen men worth millions eat greedily at banquets, their manners polished yet their greed clear. But here was a woman with nothing, and still she carried herself with respect and calm. It stirred something inside him. Mira reached across the table, pushing a piece of bread toward Ronnie in her tiny hand. Eat, she said with a laugh. Ronnie's eyes softened. She took the bread and kissed the little girl's hand gently as if she was holding something sacred. Armin felt a strange warmth seeing that moment, a warmth he had not felt in years since his wife's passing, when the house had slowly turned into a place of work rather than a place of love. After the meal, silence hung, in the hall only broken by the playful sounds of Mira tapping her spoon. Armin leaned back and asked softly, You said you were waiting near the gate when you found her. Do you live nearby? Ronnie's eyes lowered again. I have no home, she answered simply. I move from place to place. Sometimes I stay in shelters, sometimes under trees, sometimes by the river. Wherever there is space, I rest. The words struck Armin's heart, though her tone was calm, as if it was not something to hide, but simply her truth. He looked at her clothes, at her tired hands, and he knew she was not lying. He wanted to ask more, but he held back, for he could see she was not ready to open every page of her life in one night. Still, curiosity lingered like a flame inside him. Woman like her, once a stranger, now sitting at his table holding the laughter of his daughter as if she belonged to their world already. It felt unusual, unreal yet natural at the same time. Mira leaned against Ronnie after finishing her food, her small eyes growing heavy with sleep. Ronnie gently brushed her hair with her rough fingers, humming a soft tune. The sound was simple but sweet, almost like a lullaby carried by the wind. From another time, Armin found himself listening more closely than he had ever listened to any music before. It was the sound of care, the sound his daughter had missed for too long. Armin cleared his throat and spoke again, his voice slower than before. You remind me of someone who once cared for me when I was young. My mother was not rich, we struggled in a small house, but she gave me values that helped me build everything I have now. When I see you with Mira, I feel that same kind of warmth. Ronnie looked at him quietly, her eyes unreadable. She did not reply, only lowered her gaze to the sleeping child in her lap, as if her silence itself was an answer. Armin did not press further. Time passed, and soon, Mira was carried by the caretaker to her room. Her soft breathing filling the silence, Armin walked with Ronnie to the sitting area where the fire burned gently in the fireplace. The warmth lit her tired face, and for the first time he noticed lines of sadness etched around her eyes. He wondered what storms she had walked through to reach here tonight. Finally, Ronnie spoke, her voice almost like a whisper. I used to be a teacher, she said. Children were my world. I had a small life, but it was enough because I loved what I did. Then life changed in ways I could not control. I lost my family, I lost my work, and slowly I lost my home too. Since then I wander, but I never lost the wish to protect children whenever I see them. Her words fell heavy in the room, yet she did not cry. Her voice carried no bitterness, only acceptance. Armin felt a lump rise in his throat. He thought of Mira, and what could have happened if Ronnie had not been there that evening. He thought of how easily lives could break without warning. Thank you, he said finally. Thank you for protecting her. I do not know how to repay you. Ronnie gave a small smile. There is no need to repay, she said. A child is priceless. To see her safe is enough. The fire crackled. The night deepened outside, and the silence between them no longer felt heavy, but calm, like two strangers bound by something, invisible yet real. Armin realized he had spent countless nights in parties, meetings, and gatherings, yet never had he felt this kind of peace simply sitting near someone who expected nothing from him. As Ronnie rose to leave, Mira's voice echoed faintly from the corridor, calling her name. Even in her half-sleep, Ronnie turned her head, her eyes soft but firm. I should go now, she said. This is not my place. Armin stood and looked at her for a long moment. Every part of him wanted to let her go and return to his usual life, but another part whispered that this meeting was not meant to end so soon. Still, he stepped back and opened the door. The night air rushed in cool and quiet. Ronnie walked out slowly, her scarf fluttering in the breeze. She looked back once, her eyes meeting his with a strange mix of distance and closeness. Then she turned and walked into the shadows. Armin stood there long after she was gone, his mind restless, his heart uncertain. He had seen wealth, power deals, and betrayals, but tonight he had seen something different, something rare. A woman with nothing, yet carrying the strength of someone who still had everything inside. And he knew deep down this was not the last time their paths would cross. The night after Ronnie left the mansion, Armin could not sleep. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft ticking of the clock. Yet his mind was filled with the image of the woman walking away into the shadows. Something inside Him whispered that he had let go of more than just a stranger. It felt as if he had let go of a chance to bring light into the silent corners of his own home. Mira stirred in her room, calling out softly in her sleep, sometimes speaking Ronnie's name. That simple sound was enough to make Armin realize how deeply his daughter had already connected to her. He wondered what it was that made Mira trust Ronnie so quickly. Perhaps it was the gentle way she held her, perhaps the warmth in her eyes, or maybe children simply had a way of seeing what adults could not. The next morning, Armin walked through the garden where it had all begun. The oak tree stood tall, its branches swaying in the fresh breeze. The grass still carried faint marks where Mira had played in Ronnie's arms. He stood there for a long time thinking about how close he had come to losing something precious, and how fate had placed the right person there at the right moment. He had all the money in the world, yet it was a homeless woman who had given him the greatest gift of peace by keeping Mira safe. At breakfast, Mira refused to eat until she had asked about Ronnie again. "Papa, where is Ronnie?" she said, her small eyes searching the corners of the hall. Armin gently explained that Ronnie had gone away, but Mira shook her head and pouted. "No, Ronnie, stay here," she said in her broken words. Armin felt his heart soften at her insistence. He knew children did not hold on to people unless they truly felt a bond. That day, instead of going to his office, Armin made a different choice. He asked one of his staff to look for Ronnie in the nearby streets, shelters, and riverbanks. Hours passed, but no one found her. It was as if she had disappeared like a leaf carried away by the wind. Still, Armin did not give up. Something within him refused to accept that their meeting had been a single accident. By evening, Armin himself drove through the city streets, his eyes scanning every corner. The city looked different when seen through this search. Tall towers gave way to broken alleys, glowing shops stood next to walls covered with cracks and fading paint. For the first time in years, he noticed the faces of people sitting by the roadside, some tired, some lost, some silent. He realized how far he had drifted from the struggles of the world outside his glass office. Finally, near an old marketplace, he spotted a figure sitting on a bench near a tea stall. Her scarf fluttered in the wind, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze distant. It was Ronnie. Armin parked the car and walked toward her. She looked up, surprised to see him, but her face quickly returned to calm. "You should not be here," she said quietly. "This is not your world." Armin shook his head. "Perhaps it should be sometimes," he replied. "You left without saying goodbye to Mira. She has been asking about you all day." Ronnie's eyes softened at the mention of the little girl. She lowered her gaze and whispered, "Children get attached too quickly, and I did not want her to miss me when I left again. It is better for her not to see me too often." But Armin did not agree. He could feel something in her voice, a hidden pain, a fear of belonging again, only to lose everything later. He sat down beside her, ignoring the curious looks of people passing by. "You may think you bring only trouble into lives, but for Mira you brought joy," he said slowly. "And for me, you brought something I had forgotten long ago." Ronnie turned her face slightly as if to hide her emotions. She wanted to argue, but the sincerity in his tone made her stay silent. The tea stall owner placed 2 cups before them, thinking they were just ordinary people having a quiet talk. For a moment, Armin forgot his position as a wealthy businessman. He felt like a simple man sharing tea with someone who had unknowingly touched his heart. They sat there quietly as the market buzzed around them. Ronnie finally spoke, her voice heavy but calm. "You do not understand what it means to carry emptiness every day, to hold on to memories of what you lost and to fear holding anything again because you know it may slip away. I cannot step into your world because it will remind me of everything I no longer have." Armin listened with patience. He realized she was not just speaking about herself, but also about why she had tried to distance from Mira. It was not because she did not care, but because she cared too much and feared breaking the child's heart later. Still, he could not let her vanish into the streets again. "Mira needs you," he said firmly. "And perhaps I need you too, though I cannot explain why. You saved her once. Maybe you can save both of us again." Ronnie looked at him, startled by his honesty. She had expected him to offer money or some Polite words of thanks, but instead he spoke as if he truly wanted her presence in their lives. Her hands trembled slightly. She wrapped her scarf tighter around herself. "I am not what you think," she whispered. "I am not strong. I am not special. I am only someone who lost her way." But Armin shook his head. "Strength is not in riches or power," he said. "Strength is in standing up again even when the world has pushed you down. And that is what I see in you." Ronnie had no reply. Her silence was filled with emotion she could not name. Armin stood and extended his hand. "Come back with me, at least for tonight. Mira will sleep peacefully if you are there." She hesitated, her eyes flickering between his hand and the crowded street around her for a moment. It seemed she would refuse, but then the image of Mira's innocent smile flashed in her mind and she slowly rose. Together, they walked back to the car, and soon the mansion lights welcomed them again. That night, Mira's laughter echoed through the halls louder than it had in months. She clung to Ronnie, refusing to let go even when it was time for bed. Ronnie hummed her soft tune once more, and the child drifted to sleep with a smile. Armin stood by the door, watching the scene, his heart swelling with emotions he had long buried under layers of work and pride. After Mira slept, Armin offered Ronnie a small room in the guest wing. It was simple yet comfortable, far more than she had known in years. She wanted to refuse again, but her tired body could no longer fight the need for rest. She finally agreed and lay down on the soft bed, whispering a prayer she had not spoken in a long time. A prayer of thanks for the chance to feel safe, even for one night. As the moonlight streamed through the window, Armin sat in his study, unable to focus on his papers. His thoughts kept returning to the woman now sleeping under his roof. He wondered what storms she had faced, what secrets her silence carried, and why fate had brought her into their lives. So suddenly he did not have the answers yet, but he knew one thing clearly. Her presence had changed something in him, something he could no longer ignore. And so the night passed quietly. The mansion no longer felt like a lonely palace of wealth, but like a home slowly beginning to breathe again. The morning sun touched the tall windows of the mansion with soft golden light. Birds sang gently in the garden, while the fountains sparkled with drops of silver. Inside the house, Mira woke earlier than usual, her eyes bright with excitement as she called out for Ronnie. Her small feet ran across the hallway until she reached the guest room where Ronnie had rested through the night. She pushed the door open and found Ronnie sitting near the window. Her scarf neatly folded her face, calm, yet thoughtful. At the sight of Mira, she smiled and opened her arms. The little girl jumped onto her lap, laughing with pure joy. Armin watched the scene from the doorway. He had woken early too, not because of business, but because he wished to see if Ronnie was still there. A part of him had feared that she would vanish like a shadow, leaving behind only a memory. But now, as he saw Mira resting happily in her arms, he felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. Breakfast was served in the large hall, and for the first time in a long time, the atmosphere felt alive. Mira chatted in her childish voice, trying to tell stories with half-formed words, while Ronnie listened with patience, nodding and laughing softly. Armin joined them, but instead of focusing on documents or phone calls, he simply listened. He realized that the mansion, which once echoed with silence, now carried laughter, warmth, and gentle conversation. After breakfast, Armin decided to take a step he had been thinking about all night. He turned to Ronnie and said calmly, "I want you to stay here not only as a guest but as part of this home. Mira needs you, and I believe you need her too." Ronnie looked at him in surprise, her fingers tightening around her scarf. Her eyes showed a storm of emotions. Fear, disbelief, gratitude, all mixed together. "I cannot," she whispered. "This is not my place. I am not someone who belongs in a house like this." Armin leaned forward, his tone steady but kind. "Belonging is not decided by wealth or clothes. It is decided by care and by heart. And you have already given both to my daughter." Mira clapped her hands as if she understood her father's words. "Stay, Ronnie," she said in her tiny voice. "Stay." Ronnie felt tears rising, but she quickly blinked them away. She had lived for years without a roof, without comfort, without belonging. The thought of staying frightened her because it meant opening her heart again. Yet when she looked at Mira's innocent face, she knew the child's trust was something she could not refuse. Now she agreed to remain a little longer. She told herself it was temporary only until she could gather strength to walk her path again. But deep inside, she already felt the mansion slowly turning into more than just a shelter. Days turned into a week. During that time, Ronnie's presence changed everything. She woke early and helped in the kitchen, not as a servant but as someone who wished to contribute. She spent hours with Mira, teaching her simple songs and stories, guiding her tiny hands to draw shapes on paper, filling the child's days with color and joy. Even the staff of the mansion, who at first looked at her with suspicion, began to respect her for her humility and kindness. Armand noticed these changes with quiet amazement. He saw how Mira smiled more freely, how the halls no longer felt empty, how even his own evenings were brighter because there was someone who listened with sincerity. For the first time in years, he felt less like a businessman and more like a father. One evening, Armand invited Ronnie to walk with him in the garden after Mira had fallen asleep. The sky was full of stars, the air cool with the scent of flowers. They walked side by side in silence until Armand finally spoke. "You told me you were a teacher. Once," he said, "would you like to teach again?" Ronnie paused her steps, her eyes fixed on the stars above. Her voice carried a touch of longing. "Teaching was my life," she said softly. "It was not only about books. It was about shaping children, guiding them, giving them hope." But that chapter closed long ago. Armand turned to her. "Maybe it has not closed completely. Maybe it is waiting for you to begin again." Ronnie shook her head gently. "I have nothing," she replied. "No papers, no place, no strength to face that world again. I can only give small pieces of what I know to your daughter, and that is enough for me." Armand did not argue further, but in his heart, he began to think of ways to help her rebuild the life she once had. He had the resources and connections to make it possible, yet he knew he must move carefully because pride and dignity meant much to her. She was not someone who would accept gifts. She was someone who valued self-respect. The days continued, and slowly, a bond stronger than words grew. Between them, Mira began to sleep peacefully every night, holding Ronnie's hand. Armand began to look forward to evenings when they would sit by the fire, sharing small conversations about life, dreams, and memories. Though Ronnie revealed little about her past, Armand could see that behind her silence lay deep wounds and hidden strength. One afternoon, a small event showed just how much she meant to Mira. The caretaker took Mira to the park near the mansion, but a sudden noise from a passing motorbike frightened her. She cried and called for Ronnie, not for her father, not for anyone else. When Ronnie arrived running, Mira instantly calmed down and held her tightly. Armand, who had rushed there too, saw the scene and realized something very clear. His daughter's heart had chosen Ronnie as her safe place. That night, Armand sat alone in his study, reflecting on everything that had happened since the evening he first saw Ronnie in the garden. His life had been full of numbers, deals, and victories, yet all those victories had felt hollow compared to the simple moments of peace and joy brought by this woman. He asked himself why fate had crossed their paths, why a millionaire and a homeless teacher were now under the same roof. Perhaps it was chance. Perhaps it was destiny. Whatever it was, he knew he did not want it to end, but Ronnie still carried hesitation in her heart. She often reminded herself that she was only staying for a short time. Whenever she looked at the luxury around her, she felt out of place, like a guest who would soon overstay. And yet every time she tried to think of leaving, Mira's smile pulled her back. One late evening when the mansion was quiet, Ronnie stood near the window of her room looking out at the night sky. Her thoughts wandered. To her past, to the family she had lost, to the classroom she once taught in, to the laughter of children that had faded with time. Her heart ached with both pain and gratitude. Pain for everything she had lost. Gratitude for the little girl who had reminded her that her heart could still feel warmth. Unknowingly, Armand passed by the hallway and saw her standing there. He paused, not wanting to disturb her, but the look on her face touched him deeply. It was the look of someone torn between leaving and staying between fear and hope. In that moment, he promised himself that he would not let her fade into the shadows again. He would find a way to give her the life she deserved, and in return he believed his daughter, and even his own heart, would find a happiness that wealth alone could never buy. The mansion slept in silence, yet inside it, a story was slowly building, a story of two broken worlds, slowly weaving into one. Neither Armin nor Ronnie knew how the future would unfold, but both could feel that something precious had already begun. The mansion was slowly changing each day, and everyone who lived or worked there could feel it. Where there had once been silence and routine, now there was laughter, warmth, and a sense of belonging. All of this came because of Ronnie, who had walked into their lives on a night that seemed like any other, yet became the turning point for Armin and his daughter Mira. Weeks had passed since that evening, and during those weeks Ronnie had become more than just a guest, more than just a helper. She had become part of their family, though she herself refused to admit it. She woke with the morning sun, and her gentle voice filled the halls. She sang to Mira. She told her stories. She taught her little lessons in simple words. Even the staff of the mansion began to look up to her for advice, as if her strength came not from riches, but from the wisdom of someone who had walked through storms and still carried kindness. Armin noticed these changes, and with every passing day, his heart grew lighter. He had lived for years thinking that wealth alone was enough, that success was measured in numbers and contracts. Yet now he saw that true wealth was something else entirely. It was in Mira's smile when Ronnie braided her hair. It was in the calm evenings, when the three of them sat together near the fire sharing tea and soft words. It was in the way the mansion no longer felt like stone walls, but like a living, breathing home. Still, Ronnie carried hesitation inside her. At night, when she was alone in her room, she often stood by the window and whispered to herself, "This is not mine, I do not belong here." Her heart told her to stay, but her pride and her fear told her to prepare for the day. She must leave. One evening, a situation arose that would test everything they had built together. Armin had been invited to a large business gathering, one of the grandest of the season, where all the city's important people would attend. Normally, he would go alone, but this time, Mira insisted that Ronnie come too. Ronnie refused at first, saying she had no clothes for such an event, no place in such a world, but Mira cried and held her hand, refusing to let go. Finally, Armin spoke gently but firmly. "You are part of this family now," he said. "If Mira wants you there, then you should be there." The next day, a dress was prepared for her, simple yet graceful, nothing too bright, nothing too heavy. When she wore it for the first time, the staff stared in quiet awe, and even Armin found himself pausing at the sight. Ronnie looked almost like she had stepped out of her past when she was still a teacher, standing with dignity. Though her eyes still carried shyness, at the gathering whispers followed them as they entered. People wondered who the woman beside the millionaire was. Some smiled politely, some raised eyebrows, some whispered behind their hands. Armin ignored them all. He walked with confidence while Mira held Ronnie's hand, as if to tell the world that she was proud of her. During the event, Armin introduced Ronnie simply as someone important in his life and Mira's life. He did not explain further. He did not need to. Ronnie spoke little, but when she did, her words were full of grace and sincerity, surprising those who expected her to falter. In such a grand place, by the end of the evening, many people were left with respect for her, though they could not fully understand who she was. When they returned to the mansion that night, Ronnie sat quietly in her room, thinking about everything that had happened. She had walked into a world that was not hers yet. She had not felt as lost as she feared. Still, her heart whispered the same question: could she really stay? The answer came sooner than she expected. A few days later, Mira fell ill with fever. Though the doctor was called and medicine was given, it was Ronnie who never left her side. She sat by the bed all night, placing a wet cloth on the child's forehead, humming her soft tune, whispering gentle words. Armin watched helplessly from the doorway, his heart heavy with worry yet also full of gratitude. Because in that moment he saw clearly that Mira trusted Ronnie more than anyone else, even more than him. By morning, Mira's fever began to break, and her first words when she opened, her eyes were Ronnie's name. Armin felt tears rise in his eyes, and he finally understood the truth he had been trying to avoid. Ronnie was no longer just a visitor. She was the soul that had brought life back into his home that evening when Mira finally slept peacefully. Armin asked Ronnie to meet him in the garden under the oak tree where it had all begun. The night air was cool, the stars shone above, and the fountain whispered in the distance. Armin looked at her with steady eyes and spoke from his heart. You came into our lives by chance, but you changed everything. You gave my daughter love. You gave my home warmth, and you reminded me of the values I had forgotten. I do not want you to leave. I want you to stay, not as a guest, not as a helper, but as part of this family. Ronnie stood silent, her hands trembling, her heart racing. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "But I have nothing to give." Armin shook his head. "You have already given more than I ever could. You gave Mira a mother's care, and you gave me peace. That is more valuable than any wealth." Ronnie finally let her tears fall. She covered her face with her scarf as her heart battled between fear and hope. But then she remembered Mira's laughter, the child's small arms around her neck, the trust in her eyes. She remembered the nights she had whispered to herself that she did not belong, and realized those whispers were wrong. She did belong because love does not ask for wealth or status. It only asks for truth. She lowered her scarf and nodded slowly. "Yes," she said in a trembling voice, "I will stay." Armin felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over him. He had closed countless deals in his life, but this moment felt like the greatest victory of all. Not a victory of money, but a victory of heart. From that day forward, the mansion was no longer just a grand house, it was a true home. Ronnie became a permanent part of their lives, not as someone who owed them, but as someone who completed them. Mira grew happier, each day learning not only from books but from the gentle wisdom of the woman who had once been lost but was now found. And Armin himself changed. He worked less. He spent more time with his daughter. He laughed more. He listened more. He lived more. Sometimes, at night, he would stand by the garden and look at the oak tree where it all began and whisper to himself, "That night I thought I had found only a stranger, but in truth I found the missing piece of my life." And so the story of a millionaire who returned home to find a homeless woman holding his daughter ended not with distance but with unity, not with emptiness but with love. It was proof that sometimes the most unexpected encounters are the ones that bring us back to who we truly are.